Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Daring Dialogues. I am your host, Shantae Charles. Hope everybody is having a great and wonderful Friday. In so many households, it's Friday. In my whole household, it is Fry-yay. So, again, I hope everybody is doing well. It is Finance Friday. We're going to be talking cash, credit, capital. And we're going to start off, as I said, telling you a little bit about the black dollar, the history of the black dollar. We began reading a little bit about the importance of this topic. And we're going to start with the fact that black people in this country originally were the cash, were the credit, and were the capital, which is very interesting because a new report just came out showing exactly what we talked about last week about how mortgage lenders have different sets of guidelines by which they use for black Americans. So a lot of times I see a lot of people talking about black Americans lag without addressing the systemic issues that are involved in that lag. So that's what we want to do. We want to try to talk about the origins and foundation, while at the same time we are reading about capitalism and understanding our score, just being aware that something systematically had been put into place that disadvantaged us. And so we should not ignore that fact and that truth. So again, I am reading from the first book here. I'm reading from History of the Black Dollar by Angela Rich. And it really is a series of articles about different things that have to do with black labor and that how that labor was turned into wealth. All right. So the first piece here she has is Bartering Slaves, 1619. Considered under law at the time to be both person and property, the slaves had no control over their lives as laborers. All right. A new article just came out. Some of these articles are on the Daring Dialogues Facebook page. So if you want the actual articles that I'm referring to, go to that page, like the page, and have fun. Dive in. There's all kinds of articles there. But another new article just came out by a rabbi calling for reparations to be made to African Americans. Now, this is not something that is a new idea. There have actually been black people, black congressmen who have been submitting bills for decades on that same issue. But now it may pick up some traction because of who is now getting behind that idea. And in the article, he talks about how reparations is not going to necessarily make up for the emotional trauma that has been delivered to African Americans through the generations, but we can begin to redress some of the things that actually happened as a result. So now you have, good morning. So now you have a Ashkenazim saying, hey, I think we really do need to look at reparations for African Americans. Anybody with any kind of research or has done any research knows that other people groups in this country who have not experienced as much as the descendants of African American slaves in this country have gotten reparations. All right. The Japanese have gotten reparations. The Jews who are over here in America have gotten reparations. The Chinese have gotten reparations. The Native Americans have gotten reparations. So it's not like our country cannot do it. The reality is, will they do it? because they can do it. But the reality is, will they provide that form of restorative justice for African Americans? People say, well, we shouldn't ask for anything. We shouldn't want anybody to give us anything. We shouldn't ask them for nothing. No, on behalf of my descendants, I'm gonna ask. You can have that frame of mind if you want to, but on behalf of my descendants, I'm going to continue to ask. I am. Because we don't say that to other people groups when they suffer something in this country. We don't say to them, oh, you don't deserve it, or you shouldn't ask for it. You just should try to work hard enough to get out of it. But when you understand that there's a $220 wealth gap, there's a 220-year wealth gap. So that means the generations coming behind me, I want them to have a realistic opportunity of catching up to close that wealth gap. All right? So I just wanted to say that. Bartering slaves. The slave trade was an economic institution. Exporting and exploiting free labor from Africa directly contributed to the modern development of America, the Caribbean, and Latin America, as well as to the demise of Africa. All right. And let's also keep in mind that they didn't take everybody from Africa. They actually used people who were right here in the Americas, that were indigenous to the Americas. There were Africans before Columbus came, so they were taking them too. All right. Legally, slavery allowed people to maintain the right to purchase and own other human beings as property. These individuals were then able to profit from the labor of the people they owned, who were forced to work without getting paid. Slavery, however, was not simply an institution that benefited propertied individuals. It was an economic system that allowed the United States, particularly the southern states, to develop as it did. Slavery also hinged on the modern and pseudo-scientific concepts of race, which is based on skin color. By constructing a belief of biological differences based on color, as we saw in the other book earlier this week when we were talking about immigration, you saw all of those different faces where they were literally trying to draw images to distinguish people by their physical characteristics, right? People who were called white justified the oppression of people who were called black. So yes, as many people have stated over and over again, that race is a social construct. It is a created construct. It is not real. We get all of that. The problem is that when you dismiss it as just a social construct, you dismiss the fact that it was used in a very real way with very real consequences for the people who were on the darker end of the scale. So no, it's not a real concept, but it does have real consequences because people actually use that fake concept to enact real consequences and real policies that actually affect people of color. All right. And the darker you are, the more those policies affected you. Starting in 1619, slavery served as the nucleus for racial and economic justice. This system prevented blacks from receiving wages while providing high amounts of wealth to whites. I believe recently there was someone who was getting ready to, it was Johnnie Cochran. Johnnie Cochran was a part of a team of lawyers who were actually doing the calculations on how much would actually be owed to the descendants of slaves based on the wage rate. They were actually doing the calculations for that, and then boop, up Johnnie Cochran ups and dies. So I'm not sure what actually happened, what was the result end of that project, but I know it was interrupted by his death. While all whites did not own slaves, the socioeconomic gains were massive and received by all whites. This division created the hotbed for the economic divide that still exists today. Rich in agriculture, the South cultivated tobacco, rice, sugar, cotton, wheat, and hemp as the underpinnings of its economy. As the South became deeper, these industries became larger. Tobacco and hemp were staples in Virginia, Kentucky, and Missouri, while Maryland and Virginia focused on wheat. South Carolina and Georgia were prone to rice and sugar, and reigned in Louisiana. But throughout all the states, cotton stretched from the Carolinas to Texas. From the onset of the country through 1850, cotton was the most important crop to America. People often like to say cotton was king, but really, we need to say the people picking the cotton were king. Slaves managed large plantations doing everything from cooking, washing, sewing, blacksmithing, barrel making, sailing, horse training, growing crops, and a myriad of other activities, which almost makes me want to chuckle, because you have to say, well, if they were doing all of that, then what were the white people doing? Sitting around in dresses and sipping tea or lemonade, possibly. All right. Each slave received one piece of clothing per year, usually some form of burlap. They received 1 to 2 meals per day, depending on their master, and usually that meal was grits, which is still popular in the South. I like grits, but I do also understand its origin, right? Grits was the ground up cob that was left over from people eating the corn. Most slaves used food from the garden and sea to supplement the meals they were provided. This is possibly why seafood is still the number one. We are the number one consumer. We're the number one consumer still of seafood. Think about that. So the slaves would get this food from the garden and the sea to supplement the bare meals that they were actually provided with. And so they would create Southern classic meals such as fish and grits and shrimp and grits. Collard greens were discovered by slaves attempting to find food deep in the woods. I love me a good set of collard greens. Slaves also used the garden to make home remedies for illnesses, since doctors were only called for highly valued slaves. All right. So again, our resourcefulness just keeps on working out for us. The power and circulation of the black dollar began in 1621. Shortly after slavery started, a group of black Virginians in 1621 earned enough money to purchase land where they formed a store selling tobacco and rice. By 1700, blacks started learning Native American languages, which created more opportunities for them as trappers, scouts, and traders and liaisons for whites. George Bunga from Duldo, Minnesota, was a trader, trapper, and interpreter at the signing of the Chippewa Treaty of 1837. James Beckworth, a freedman and entrepreneur, helped Native Americans to discover a pass through the Sierra Nevada mountains, and it became named in his honor. Another famous man named York, William Clark's slave, served as the guide for Lewis and Clark expedition. His unique features and great strength were viewed with astonishment and awe by Native Americans encountered across the continent. His presence was considered a remarkable phenomenon that enhanced the prestige of the white strangers, who never had been seen previously by isolated Indian populations. So they were using slaves as scouts to go and formulate treaties with Indians, and we know how that turned out. Emanuel Bernoulli and his wife Mary started another black business of grave importance, started in 1736. It's a little known fact that this black couple opened America's first oyster and ale house in Providence, Rhode Island. In 1778, Richard Allen and Absalom Jones saw the budding economy of the black community and formed the Free African Slave Society, the first organization to help educate newly freed people on socioeconomic issues. I hope everybody is able to see, because on my end, nothing is breaking up. All right. So if you can see and hear me clearly, please put some hearts on the screen so I know that we're still good. All right. Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable, owner of a trading post, was also a trapper, farmer, and mechanic. He served as a middleman for blacks in the British military, French settlers, and Native Americans. He was the first to settle on a piece of land in Illinois known now as Chicago. By 1800, blacks owned several businesses, but they were small in size and focused on the service industry. However, there were a few exceptions. Mr. James Fordin created a niche market for himself by becoming a master sailmaker who invented and patented a method for handling sails for sailboats. In 1832, he managed a full staff that included blacks and whites in his Philadelphia plant, grossing $10,000. In 1846, Aaron Washworth became the largest cattle rancher in Jefferson County, Texas, owning 2,470 cattle and 4,578 acres of land. Blacks were also among the first to master financial product sales in America. Tommy LaFawn, real estate broker and businessman, generated $500,000 during his life. In fact, he left the money to several New Orleans charities, including a black school. All right. Thank you, Lady Evelyn. Shortly after he died, Louisiana legislature recognized him for his charitable contributions to New Orleans. Despite these advancements, majority of blacks remained in the harsh chains of slavery. During idle times, slaves would be leased to industrial employers. During even rougher times or simply at will, they would be sold. From 1805 to 1860, there was a well-established market for slaves, which meant that the slave was a highly liquid asset that could easily be converted to cash if the owners wished to sell the slave for any reason. Females were particularly valued for childbearing to increase their stock. Considered under law to be both person and property, the slaves had no control over their lives as laborers. Excuse me. In 1860, approximately 400,000 whites owned 4 million slaves, equating to 12% of the white population, controlling more than 50% of the slaves in the country, creating a power elite. With this esteemed help, it's fascinating to know that the South still lagged the North by 20% in manufacturing. Wages for whites were lower in the South, with per capita income at $103 compared to $141 in the North. The South was slow to develop due to a lack of reliable transportation, well-trained managers, and modern technology. I want to say good morning to those of you who are coming in. We're talking finance today, and we're talking cash, capital, and credit. And what I just finished reading, the first part about the history of the black dollar and how black people were the original cash credit system and capital system in the United States. All right. We are now moving into the book, Ben Stein's book, The Capitalist Code. And then we're going to finish up today with talking about the credit score. Chapter 2. How I learned to stop worrying and loved capitalism. I finally know what distinguishes man from the other beasts: financial worry. Think about that. Let's start this part of our story by talking about men and women perhaps a bit older than most of the readers here. Let's assume that we're talking about your parents or grandparents. They have serious fears, largely because they did not understand the free market and democratic capitalism. It's a little more graphic than that. A nightmare is haunting America: the fear of personal financial disaster. The fear is that although the middle-class American is sitting in front of his television watching 300 channels about zombies and dope addict Hollywood stars, or planning their next trip to the Bahamas, or wondering where their son might get into college, some horrible day down the road, he or she will simply run out of money. This can happen, and it does. Every year, roughly 1 million Americans go into bankruptcy, and many more than that are seriously delinquent on payments on credit cards or other loans. Throughout the land, and perhaps even within your own family, there may be a fear that although today we are the ones driving down the boulevard or the main street in our air-conditioned cars and listening to music that billionaires would have envied 10 years ago, someday we will be one of these people, possibly living right next to the stoplight and needing to go to find food in the dumpster. So there's always been this fear, right, of economic loss or the fear of economic scarcity. The reality of financial collapse. This fear takes on a concrete aspect when we see so many homeless Americans. We are afraid of terrorism, of course, and we should be, but we don't see victims of terrorism all around us every day. That depends on where you live. We're afraid of nuclear war, but we become numb to it. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a long time ago, and the Iranian bomb is still in the future. The North Koreans are awakening us, but not enough yet. As a matter of fact, our president has agreed to meet with them, I think, in May. The day Seattle goes up in flames, it won't be a sanctuary city any longer, but that's in the future. Yet almost every one of us, if we are alive and alert, sees the homeless frequently, and once in a while, we might even recognize the facial features of someone we know. Even if we do not come up against actual homelessness, which I have twice, all right, almost every one of us knows someone who once had a comfortable middle class or upper class or even upper class status who is now in dire straits, living on maybe their tiny Social Security check and caging loans from us that will never be repaid. We all know people who used to throw bums a dime in their prime or toss $10 bills to valets and bellboys who now consider it a luxury to get Domino's pizza. In fact, Domino's really, sidebar, we all know people who look at statements from their brokers or from their banks and look at their most recent canceled bank checks and can count the months until they run out of money. It happened to many of my best friends. People who once lived with confidence in authentic luxury are now reduced to actual terror or prolonged despair. In any given week, I hear from several of them. They almost always want money, and if the requester is a lifelong friend, I usually give it. Or they want a financial miracle from me in the form of advice that can turn their lives around. But they are now in their 60s or in their 70s. I am not a miracle worker, and if a man with several dependents is really close to broke, I simply lack the wherewithal to pull him and those like him out of the ditch. I wish these people had come to me maybe 30 years ago and asked the same questions. I wished I had asked myself the same questions 40 years ago. And again, to go back to the grimmest example, although few of the homeless were once solidly middle class, just seeing human beings with 2 arms and 2 legs living in rags and shuffling down alleys is terrifying. It happened to them. Who's to say it won't happen to us? And yet again, in fact, in real life, people's financial lives do collapse. We usually see this as something less than homelessness, but we see a drastic change in lifestyle, maybe from suburban 4-bedroom house to a studio apartment all too often. And as we sentient human beings worry about it, we would be mistaken not to worry. And we just don't worry about it. Some of us are in serious fear. So, life happens. I used to actually have, when I was in the public school, I created a game called Life Happens so I could help my students to understand that even with the best financial planning, things will come along in your life that will simply happen that you don't have any personal control over, that will cause some kind of deterrent or some kind of financial loss, and you will still have to adjust your plan and work around whatever life moment happens to you. We don't have to do anything really wrong for this kind of catastrophe to happen. We don't have to be caught in a scandal or in a crime. No need for an accident or an illness. No need even for a divorce. It's just part of the progression of life for incomes to go up and down. This is not a disgrace. It isn't a mark of shame. It is simply life. It is so much a part of life that Milton Friedman, a mega genius economist whom I often cite, wrote about it as a basic tenet of life. We will tend to spend all of what we earn. We will tend not to have enough for a comfortable retirement. Again, this will not happen to everyone, but it will happen to tens of millions of Americans. Incomes rise and fall, and jobs are found and lost. If we do not make provisions for this virtual inevitability, we will suffer. We don't want it to happen to us. It's not pretty. Even more inevitably, we are rightly in serious fear, actual terror, about what happens when we are past our prime. Again, what happens when we are put out to pasture and no longer have a regular paycheck? Most people talk about this in terms of the term ageism, where after a certain age, certain industries and certain economies, right, they don't want to hire people who are older. And so a person who is older, who has not properly planned for their future or has been hit with a lot of life happen circumstances, can now find themselves struggling, right, to find work later in life when they need to supplement their income. So what happens if we are locked into a world where we have grown used to spending a certain amount on maybe your car, your mortgage, supporting your children, and then suddenly the X factor necessary to support that lifestyle, right, like coming into work for decades, becomes only 10% of your X? What happens when we become like Wile E. Coyote and run off a cliff and our legs still pedaling in midair, and suddenly look down to see there's nothing supporting us and an anvil is about to fall on our heads just after we hit the ground? All right. No plan equals no money. No plan equals no money. So you really have to think about, what is your plan? How are you setting aside income for the future? What kinds of tools are you using to invest the income you have now so that it can grow? No plan equals no money. To illustrate, here in Hollywood, he says, there's a classic joke about TV writers and their employers. They pay us $5,000 a week until we need $5,000 a week to live on, and then they fire us. It's called the Velvet Alley, and it's all too real. Roughly 60% of boomers are seriously worried about this fate and believe they have not prepared adequately for it. I queried a number of financial planners who said that in their experience, the actual percentage is higher. I've been told almost everyone is in fear. True, the majority of boomers have at least some financial plan. It's a small majority, and it excludes tens of millions. It might be inadequate, but at least there's a plan. There's a positive luxury compared with what awaits the ones without a plan, and that includes many millennials. The millennials, to be sure, are young enough still to do something about it, and I hope they will. But the cards are stacked against them in many ways, including home ownership and pensions, so they have to play a clever hand to turn a trick to retirement. Boomers often had the great cards of a rising real estate market, owning their own homes, which they bought when real estate was affordable to those starting out in their work lives, and the long discarded defined benefit pension plan. Those cards are unlikely to be dealt out again. And if we see what is happening with our government right now, with the tax breaks for the very, very wealthy, with minimal tax breaks that only going to last for 8 years for the middle class, and almost zero tax breaks for anybody really below middle class, this is actually very true. So he's saying a lot of the advantages that the boomer generation had to save up wealth, the people coming after are not going to have those advantages. And then if you look at what they want to do to what they call the entitlements, right? The Social Security benefits and things of that nature, by the time millennials get older, they really are going to be, unfortunately, out of luck. I don't want to use the word luck, but they're going to be not in a good place if they don't have a financial plan and start planning right now. Roughly 80% of millennials, some of whom are now in their late 30s, by some definitions, have no plan at all. They are not saving any meaningful sums for retirement. In fact, a lot of them are not saving at all. They have no plan and they have no planners, and they have very little money. They know very little about finance. This is not a formula for sleeping well at night. Or look at it from another angle. More than half of American families could not come up with $500 on the spot for an emergency. Back it up from there and try to think how many have enough saved to cover their salaries if there was another Great Depression, which people are saying is a possible prospect if our government goes through with the steel tariff and some other things that they're trying to plan. It's a possibility, because when you continue to put into place things that drive the country into depression, then it's a stronger possibility. All right? It's not all about fear. Please understand. There are people who do have plans, and they have yachts, and they have tan faces and confident smiles. They're in the ads for investment planning firms. There are not many of them in real life. They're actors or models in front of cameras with makeup artists to make them look great. And often a horse or a dog in a house as a sure sign of stability. But let's get back to reality. In this glorious America, there are simply not enough who actually do have a plan of any kind at all, or even a meaningful idea of how the system works to get them to that TV commercial beach in that magazine sailboat or anything close to it. Just to hit you over the head with this again in numbers, the average Americans nearing retirement saying they need roughly $50,000 a year to live on, but they have savings sufficient to generate only 20% of that. Yes, they will have some small sums from Social Security, which will make things better. Yes, some will have been able to serve in the public sector for long periods and accrue those public sector pensions that they suck out of the jugulars of the taxpayers. But a huge number will experience the shortfall after they retire. Too many will simply run out of money except to live at a depressingly modest level. Buttered toast happens to be one of my wife's favorite meals, but to eat it every day would not be a good feeling. That is our read for today from The Capitalist Code. And let's move on over to our next book, which is Your Score, An Insider's Secret to Understanding, Controlling, and Protecting Your Credit Score. Chapter 1. What you don't know can hurt you. What you don't know can hurt you. Getting ready to buy a home for the first time is one of the most stressful things you do in your financial lifetime. If you have bought a home, you can put some hearts on the screen. Or if you're on my YouTube, you can type in, yes, I have. My husband and I, we bought a home and we short sold it. So we have been through the home buying process. Having learned from that and from experience, I would actually want to not buy a home again in America. That's just me. But it wasn't a stressful time for us. Our home buying process actually went pretty well. If you're like most people, you probably don't know much about the process, so you go into it hoping you're getting some good and reliable guidance from your realtor and from the mortgage person your realtor swears will take good care of you. So you go to the bank and sit across the desk from somebody you've never met before. You fill out a form that asks for your social security number, your job history, your bank account information, and your annual income. You do what you are told and wait to see if you qualify for a loan. The mortgage originator punches a few keys, scans the screen, and then announces you qualify for such and such loan at this interest rate, and you have a down payment requirement. You walk out of the office feeling a mixture of excitement and fear. You can see the path to your new home, but you probably have no idea what you're signing yourself up for, except for 30 years of payments that are bigger than almost any single check you've ever written. For most, this is a nerve-wracking experience. And it would be nice to feel that all of the people involved in the transaction are on your side and are working to get you the best deal possible. But the hard truth is that the entire consumer credit business, from the bureaus that keep track of your credit history to the credit card companies, auto lenders, and mortgage originators that are in position to give you money, to the credit counseling services that advertise themselves as the solution to your debt problems, are all lined up with one single goal in mind. They're there to make money. Your money. Those companies are looking to make a profit on everything from the money you borrow to the information you submit just to get the loan process started. And as for the mortgage originator, regardless of whether or not you actually apply for a loan there or even get approved, they're sending all of your personal data along with an aggregator that then sells it on to other companies that will then advertise their services to you in the future. In other words, from the very first time you filled out your first application for a student loan or a $500 limit credit card, your financial life is being monitored, inspected, sliced and diced by hundreds of different companies. They're evaluating you on your performance, predicting your financial future, and figuring out how to sell you more stuff. This is why, and I think that colleges have gotten better about this, but this is why when I was a freshman in college, the first thing they try to do when you come on campus is to get you involved in some sort of credit. So if your parents have not been helping you to establish a bank account, if they haven't helped you to get a credit card or whatever under their name and things like that, the first thing they're trying to do is get you a line of credit, get you a credit card. And I know many collegiate students that crashed and burned their freshman year running up credit cards on books, running up credit cards on food when their food budget for their meal plan ran out, and different things like that. So if you have children, especially those who are headed off to college, you need to have a talk with them about credit. You need to have a talk with them about credit cards. You need to have a talk with them about high interest rates on credit cards, all of that kind of stuff before they hit a college campus, because they're going to be inundated. All right? And you don't want your child roped into debt their freshman year of college. Not that kind of debt, not credit card debt. All right? But that isn't all. All the data that those companies are compiling gets crunched into a set of 3 numbers that make up your credit score. That score is being used by insurance companies, potential employers, landlords, even potential spouses to see where you stand and how you measure up financially. Most people have no idea who has eyes on their financial life, how things like credit scores are calculated, and specifically what kinds of bad things can happen when they don't pay their bills on time. It's sort of like walking into a casino and playing a table game where there are no rules listed and nobody is there to explain what to do. You're just putting money down and hoping nobody rips you off too badly. Even if you're one of the few people who understands a little bit about how the world of consumer credit works and is aware of what credit scores are and how they work, you're still probably not getting the real information that lenders and other companies are using to judge you. And as I said last week, we actually found that out as we were going through different processes, that they take an aggregate score, or they take a sum score and they average it based on what kind of loan you're getting. So you may have a really good credit score overall, but for example, if you're going for a car, they only look at your credit score history in regards to automobiles, and then they factor a score from that. So your automobile score may actually be lower than your overall credit score. That's just one example, all right? So most of the free credit reports you receive online or through a special offer from your credit card company are very weak estimates of your true credit scores. They can be off by as much as 50 points. And 50 points is the difference between qualifying for the best rate you can get on a mortgage or being stuck with a subprime loan that costs you tens of thousands more dollars. Let's say you're one of the very few who knows the full picture of their financial life, and you're doing a great job keeping track of your credit and protecting yourself and your personal information. In fact, you can have totally perfect data security within your home and your computer, but it just takes one careless merchant that doesn't invest in their own digital security to accidentally leave a door open for a hacker to take your social security number, your account number, your address, and all other personal information they need to rip you off. I'm not trying to frighten you, but there's plenty that should make you concerned about what's happening without your knowledge. According to the documentary film Maxed Out, Hard Times, Easy Credit, and the Era of Predatory Lenders, all right, 90% of all credit reports provided by the U.S. credit bureaus have inaccurate information in them. And the fastest growing problem affecting the security of your credit report isn't a criminal stealing your identity. It's your file being accidentally merged with someone else's and having your credit scores hurt by information that doesn't have anything to do with you. So if you're like me, you're like my husband, you like to get your credit report and look through it and see if there's any erroneous things on your bill, on your report that has been charged to you, and you're like, wait a minute, I never opened this account. I don't know what this is, where it comes from, etc. But it could be on your credit report. As he said, the biggest issue right now is not identity theft. It's your information being merged with someone else's, and it shouldn't actually be on your report. You would think that the credit bureaus, organizations whose goal is to collect comprehensive financial information on as many people as possible so that creditors can predict risk, would want to have the right and correct information assigned to the right and correct person. But there's no incentive for them to fix anything ever. Why? Because in the vast majority of cases, the mistakes on the person's credit report are causing their credit to be judged more negatively, not more positively. And customers with lower credit scores end up getting charged more interest, which can be more profitable for the lenders. So it's not profitable for them to fix what's wrong on your credit report. It's not just me saying this. In 2011, the three main credit bureaus, Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax, settled a class action lawsuit for $45 million brought by almost 1 million plaintiffs. In the suit, the consumers charged the credit bureaus with failing to accurately report the discharging of debts and for failing to investigate when consumers disputed a record on their reports. In addition to paying the lawsuit settlement, the bureaus were also required to go back and correct the records of more than 1 million consumers who had filed for bankruptcy going all the way back to 2003. In another case, an Oregon woman won an $18.6 million lawsuit against Equifax in 2013 after spending years trying to correct mistakes on her credit report that appeared when her file was merged with another person. She was denied by a variety of lenders based on inaccurate information that she had tried to remove on 8 separate occasions over 3 years. So again, it is not beneficial for them to try to fix it because your bad score means more money for them. In 2015, Equifax settled a lawsuit filed by 8 consumers who complained that the credit bureau misrepresented the source of public record information that it was placing on its credit reports. If you read your credit report from Equifax and it showed a tax lien, a bankruptcy, or other court-related judgment, Equifax reported the source of that material as the specific court where those judgments occurred. But Equifax was not getting information directly from the courts. It was aggregating it from other sources, like a website that publishes links to stories from other media. The lawsuit claimed that Equifax didn't verify the information to make sure it was up to date and free of error. Just how powerful is this information vacuum? The Consumer Federation of America did a survey in 2016 and found that 32% of American consumers had never accessed their credit report, and another 44% hadn't requested a report in the last year. The reports referred to in that survey were the ones that summarized the last 2 years of your credit history, not the comprehensive real reports that you need to have to get a complete picture of where you stand. The time has come to demystify the entire consumer credit business so you can see exactly what kind of information is being tracked, how it's being used, and how you can control it to best serve your interests, not just the creditors. It all starts with your score. So we have one last section to read, and then we are going to stop for today. All right. When we come back next week, we're going to talk about what hurts your score and what doesn't hurt your score. All right. What is your score? The consumer credit industry is massive, with hundreds of millions of credit accounts active and more being added and closed every day. It's way different from how it was 50 years ago, when you could walk into your local bank, apply for and receive a mortgage from a person you probably knew personally. Now, mega corporations like Chase and American Express are making almost instantaneous decisions about you and your finances, and they need a way to be able to judge you quickly. A credit score is an elegant solution. It lets an untrained customer service rep take one quick look at your credit score number and give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down. These days, companies can process millions of applications and other requests automatically instead of going through the laborious process of manually underwriting every potential loan. A credit score also serves an extremely effective secondary purpose. Since so much of your financial life relies on your credit scores, you're motivated not to damage them by failing to pay your bills on time. If you owe American Express $500, Amex is much more likely to get its money because you're afraid of what will happen if you don't pay it back. It could sue you for the money and win, but the penalties you will then pay in the form of higher interest and worse terms across every other account is way more painful than just the $500 you owe. That system of scoring is managed by, of course, the 3 credit bureaus, the same ones that have had problems keeping their consumer data straight, the same ones that have problems with breaches and security. Those are the ones who are managing this most important score, which is why I have a problem. I have a personal problem with that. Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax are the official clearinghouses for consumer credit data. If you're a lender, you sign up with one of these bureaus or all of them to collect information on your accounts. The bureaus then aggregate the data from your accounts with accounts from thousands of other creditors. For example, if you have 2 credit card accounts, 2 student loans, a car loan, and a mortgage, the credit bureaus will likely have a complete record of when you originated these accounts, how much you've paid on them, if your payments have been on time, and how close you are to your credit limit on any of these revolving accounts. That's hundreds or even thousands of data points just in your file. And if you've ever used your Social Security number to apply for a loan, you have one of those files. Once all that data has been aggregated, the bureaus use a third-party algorithm to compare your data with millions of other people who have had similar data sets over the years. So I want you to think about that. Your data is being compared with other people's data in order to form your score. The algorithms basically estimate how good you're going to be at paying your bills and what kind of risk you'll present to a potential lender. What comes out is an assessment of each person's credit worthiness on a numerical scale. That is your score. The subscribers to the bureaus can then use those scores as a benchmark for whether or not to offer a potential customer a loan, and also to determine on what terms the loan will be issued. If you think of consumer credit as a kind of game, the credit bureaus are the scorekeepers. But it's important to mention again that the scorekeepers are hired by your creditors, the ones who give you the money, not you. So they aren't necessarily looking out for your best interests. Those credit scores get output onto the scale that you're probably at least a little bit familiar with. You're actually rated on a scale from 300 to 850. All right. A lot of people try to strive for a 750 to an 800 as far as their credit score, but the score goes from 300 to 850, with 850 being a perfect credit score. You should also know that this score moves up and down based on factors like your payment history, how close you are to your credit limit, and what other kinds of credit accounts you own. Where you stand on that numerical scale lets lenders put you into a certain credit category. As you'll discover in stories throughout this book, this is a big deal because a small change in your credit score can have a massive and cascading impact on what kinds of credit you're able to get and the rates that you will pay for it. All right. So we're going to talk next week about what is actually hurting your score and what does not hurt your score. All right. This has been another episode of Daring Dialogues. I have been your host today. I hope that I have said something that was helpful to you, to get you to understand that life happens. And then also, as the gentleman is talking about here, understanding how credit works and understanding that ultimately all of these people are working together, not necessarily in your best interest. So you got to learn how to play the game so that you can do well at it and that it benefits you and not just the lenders. All right. I want to say to you, thank you all for your time and attention. Next week, when we hit episode 25, that's going to be a giveaway episode. So I will have plenty of giveaway items for those of you who will participate. Exactly. Life happens and we have to crack the system. Thank you, Evelyn. Lady Evelyn has said. And so I hope that you have a great and wonderful weekend. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness. So please go out this weekend and be light. We will be back here on Periscope and YouTube Sunday at 2:30 p.m. for our Sunday service. So you can catch us by live stream if you're not in the area. If you are in the area, feel free to join us. You can find our directions on our page, Life Nation, our Facebook page, and come and check us out. See what we're doing. See what the Lord is doing. All right. Again, have a great and wonderful weekend. Take care and God bless.